It's all right, I'll be talking for a while. You can keep on chewing. The camera will be on me. Good evening, South Windsor. I'd like to call the Quad Board meeting of the Town Council, Board of Education, Economic Development, Planning and Zoning Special Work Session to order for Tuesday, September 20th, 2022 at 7 p.m. I'll take a roll call of the council. Councilor Evans is here. Councilor Kabaski? Here. Councilor Lopez? Councilor Paterna? Here. Deputy Mayor King? Here. Councilor Kazakowski? Councilor Gamble, and Councilor Lydecker is here, so we are all present. Oh, myself present. And for my remarks this evening, first and foremost, what I want to say is good evening, and welcome to the Quad Board Work Session meeting. I'd like to thank the Town Council, Board of Education, Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Economic Development Commission members for your dedication to the town of South Windsor and for the many volunteer hours you have contributed for the betterment of our community. Thank you for taking the time out of your lives to attend another meeting besides your own. Thank you to the staff, Town Manager, Mr. Maniscalco, Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Carter, the Town Planner, Michelle Leip, and Assistant Town Manager, Scott Roberts, for the hours you have contributed and for working with the volunteers to accomplish their designated duties and responsibilities. Tonight we come together to share the opportunities and challenges that the Town Council, Board of Education, Planning and Zoning, and Economic Development will be facing over the coming years so we can set our community on a path for a prosperous future. Oh, we're gonna hold off for 1 second because we're not live yet, I'm sorry, or recording yet. I think they may have difficulty. I may have to start over, I apologize. I'd like to call a 5-minute recess to our work session. Is there a second? A motion?
Second.
What's that? I didn't hear you. Oh, okay. We're all set now. Sorry, we're all set now. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Let me start over, please. I apologize. I want to get all this recorded.
Is your mic on, Liz?
It sure is. With my voice, really? Do you want me to move it closer? I don't think so. Okay. Okay, it is now, what time is it? We're gonna start over with the, NASA says 7:03. Gotcha. I'd like to welcome you to the Quad Board meeting of the Town Council, Board of Education, Economic Development, Planning and Zoning Special Work Session on Tuesday, September 20th, 2022 at 7 p.m. 7:03, I apologize, 7:03 p.m. I'm calling the meeting to order, and I'd like to do a roll call now, please. We have Councilor Evans.
Here.
Councilor Kabaski.
Here.
Councilor Lopez. Councilor Paterna.
Here.
Deputy Mayor King.
Here.
Councilor Kazakowski.
Here.
Councilor Gamble. Here. And Councilor Lydecker. Here. And myself, I'm here. We're all present. Thank you. So tonight, with the mayor's remarks, I'd like to say good evening, South Windsor, and welcome to the Quad Board Work Session meeting. I'd like to thank the Town Council, Board of Education, Planning and Zoning Commission, and Economic Development Commission members for your dedication to the town of South Windsor and for the many volunteer hours that you have contributed for the betterment of our community. Thank you for taking the time out of your lives to attend another meeting besides your own. Thank you to the staff, Town Manager Mr. Maniscalco, Superintendent of Schools Dr. Carter, Town Planner Michelle Leip, and Assistant Town Manager Scott Roberts for the hours that you have contributed for working with the volunteers to accomplish their designated duties and responsibilities. Tonight we come together to share the opportunities and challenges that the Town Council, Board of Education, Planning and Zoning, and Economic Development will be facing over the coming years, and so we can set up our community on the path to a prosperous future. Each of us on a board and commission or elected official have the duty and responsibility to make decisions with the best interest of South Windsor in mind. I have all the confidence in the world that we can achieve great things when we work together. The goal of this meeting is to have a better understanding of where we are presently and to discuss where and how we will be moving forward. Based upon the information that will be shared this evening, we will have the opportunity for an open and honest discussion concerning the way we are going to be able to meet and pay for our current and future needs. So at this time, I would like to invite Dr. Carter to present her Board of Education information with her PowerPoint.
Thank you, Mayor.
Or whatever you want to say too. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see everyone. It is my pleasure to speak to you tonight about the school district's enrollment growth and the ways in which we are responding. This is an important conversation as our growth enrollment impacts every member of our community, including students, parents, staff, and the South Windsor taxpayer. In front of you is a guide, and I'll prompt you when to turn the page since we're not on a PowerPoint right now. Closer.
Yeah, I don't hear you over that.
How's this? Can you hear it? Is it on? Yep. Okay. So if you would turn to page 1, please. I have long held the belief that my job is to solve problems, not complain about them. And sometimes I take that mantra so literally that I fail to give voice to the challenges we face as a district. As you know, South Windsor is currently among the fastest growing K-12 school district in the state. And our skyrocketing student population makes us an anomaly in comparison to like communities. Many of our town leaders and residents, including myself, have described our growth as a good problem to have. I have focused on the word good in that sentence, citing my pride in knowing that families are flocking to our community for the schools. We should all be proud that South Windsor offers schools so exceptional that we are overwhelmed by the number of families wanting to be a part of our inclusive community. Yet there is another word in that phrase, a good problem to have, and that I will address this evening. That is the word problem. Tonight, I will take the opportunity to share some of the problems that come with increasing enrollment, specifically the impact on facilities, and equally important, the impact on operating budgets. At this time, you can turn to page 2. Page 2 provides you with our current enrollment by school as of September 1st this year. Our total enrollment district-wide is 4,884 students. Page 3 provides you with our historical enrollment data, as well as our future projections. After a decade of declining enrollment, that trend shifted course in 2016. Since 2015, our enrollment has increased by 770 students, and we are projected to increase by an additional 683 students by 2031. This would result in an increase of 1,453 students between 2015 and 2031. To put that number into context, there are 72 school districts in Connecticut whose total student population is smaller than 1,500 students. In other words, just our actual and projected increase is bigger than the total enrollment of 72 Connecticut school districts. As you can see on page 4, the information available to us in 2013 at the inception of the 10-year elementary facilities plan is quite different from the information available to us today. Like most school districts in Connecticut, our enrollment had been declining for over a decade. And in 2013, the trend was forecast to continue. Understandably, many residents assume that we are building new elementary schools in response to our increasing enrollment, but that is not the case. The 10-year plan was adopted in part as a response to declining enrollment and the town's desire to close a school to achieve efficiencies. In 2013, demographers projected that our total population today would be 3,485 students. We are now at 4,884 students, which is 1,399 more students than what was forecast at the time we developed the 10-year plan. Page 5 is also highly instructive. In 2012, the developers representing South Windsor Woods provided its projections for the number of school-age children the new housing would generate. In their report, they projected the development would generate 21 school-age children in the short term and 35 children in the long term. Today, the neighborhood has generated 117 students. I'll repeat that. Instead of a range of 21 to 35 students, the neighborhood actually produced 117 students. This is a significant difference and one that is highly impactful on district operations. Please know this is not a criticism of their report, rather an example that forecasting formulas that might be accurate in other communities cannot be relied upon in South Windsor. We are truly an outlier, and our formulas and projections are behaving differently than demographers expect. Page 6 also illustrates the degree to which we are an outlier. When you look in comparison to other Hartford County Derby towns, you see that 5 of the other 6 towns experienced either declining or flat enrollment at the K-5 level, with only 1 town showing an increase. South Windsor stands in stark contrast with a 23.4% increase in its K-5 population and a 13.9% increase in its K-12 population between 2016 and 2021. Page 7 is evidence that despite the loss of sleep I have experienced over our skyrocketing enrollment and the impact on district operations, I am also trying to maintain my sense of humor. This famous line from the movie Jaws pretty much sums it up. Clearly, we do need a bigger boat. So let's take a look on page 8 as to how we have been building a bigger boat. At Eli Terry, we added 2 additional classrooms during construction and are moving a district-wide special education program to the new Pleasant Valley. At Orchard Hill, we moved the entire preschool program to the middle school. We converted a library instructional space into a classroom, and OH is a possible site for future expansion for district-wide special education programming if enrollment growth at Eli Terry continues. At Philip R. Smith, we added 3 additional classrooms during construction. Plans are underway to add 2 portable classrooms, and we removed a wall between a reading instruction room and book storage to create an additional classroom. At Pleasant Valley, we are in the process of adding an additional classroom during construction to alleviate space issues at Eli Terry. And it should be noted that Pleasant Valley currently relies on 12 portables. At Timothy Edwards Middle School, we constructed 4 new classrooms within the current footprint. We will be moving the preschool program to the new PV. We are currently researching the feasibility of enlarging the cafeteria, and plans are underway to move the copy center to Wapping School. And at South Windsor High School, plans are underway to convert Wapping School into the high school annex. You can turn to page 9. Okay, so as you just heard, we have implemented many, many strategies to build a bigger boat. But my primary message tonight is that the district not only requires a bigger boat, it requires a bigger budget. I fear the impact of enrollment growth on our annual operating budget is not as readily understood as the bigger boat concept. As I stated earlier, the fact that families are flocking to South Windsor for its schools is something to celebrate, but it is also something that costs a lot of money. I say it that plainly because I believe not enough attention is being paid to this reality. On your slide is one example to illustrate the magnitude of costs associated with increasing enrollment. As you see in this chart, just since 2015, our enrollment growth required us to increase elementary classroom teachers by 23 FTEs. The cost of 23 additional teachers is just over $2 million. That is just one example of increasing costs associated with enrollment. And that is just elementary classroom teachers. That does not include special education teachers, English learner teachers, art, music, library, PE, and STEM teachers. That does not include increased staffing in non-certified areas such as custodians or paraprofessionals. And it does not include all of the significant staffing increases that we have made at TE and the ones that will appear in future budgets for the high school. Please know I share this not to depress you or cause panic. I share this because this is our reality and we must face it. You can't expect to grow your elementary school population by 30% and expect that a 3% budget increase is going to meet the demands. As superintendent of schools, I manage 82 million taxpayer dollars, and I take this responsibility extremely seriously. And part of that responsibility includes alerting town leaders and the public when a change in conditions will cause an increase in taxes. Turn to the next slide, please. Some of you may be thinking, well, the school district will just have to tighten its belt and decrease spending. These next few slides illustrate why that is not a practical solution. For the fourth consecutive year, the number of districts that spend more per pupil than South Windsor has increased. South Windsor's FY 2021 net current expenditures per pupil is significantly lower than the state average, and for the second consecutive year has the lowest NCEP in the entire DIRG B category. On page 11, it shows the progression of our DIRG ranking for NCEP since 2019. As you can see, this progression demonstrates the following. In 2019, 16 districts in our DIRG spent more per pupil than South Windsor. In 2020 and 2021, all of the other 20 districts in our DIRG spent more per pupil than South Windsor. On page 12, the 5-year look back of a statewide analysis is even more compelling. You can see a steadily increasing number of districts are spending more per pupil than South Windsor. In 2021, only 12 towns out of 166 spent less per pupil than South Windsor, with 153 districts spending more per pupil than South Windsor. Said another way, 92% of school districts spent more per pupil than South Windsor. Clearly, the Board of Education has been an excellent financial steward, but we must face the reality of the rising costs associated with being among the fastest growing school districts in the state. When you consider that 92% of the state is investing more per student, cutting the board's budget is not a practical or fiscally responsible approach to mitigate the impact of costs associated with increasing enrollment. And it is also important to note that just covering the rising costs due to increasing enrollment will only allow us to maintain current services, opposed to achieving improvements to move the district forward. For example, I know Chairman Zimmerman will appreciate me pointing out that South Windsor High School is the only high school in our DIRG that does not have a lighted athletic field. That is just one example of a needed resource that is above and beyond and separate than just responding to increasing enrollment. And on your last slide, I close with thanking all of our town leaders in the room tonight for your volunteerism and unwavering commitment to our community. I thank you for the countless ways you have supported our schools. Everyone here has a role to play in ensuring that we have safe, healthy, and right-sized facilities for our students, and that we fund our operating budgets required to meet our moral and legal obligation to provide an outstanding public education to the children, families, and taxpayers of South Windsor. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. I'd like to just ask everyone if they can hold their questions, because we are going to have an open forum discussion after all the presentations are given to us. So, but just hold off for that. And now at this time, I'd like to move on to Mr. Maniscalco to present the government information, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I'd like to go around the room and say thank you to all the different boards that are here, from the Board of Education, Planning and Zoning, Economic Development, and the Town Council. I know it's been a challenge to wrangle everybody into the room all at the same time, and I think it's pretty monumental to actually be able to pull that off. And I think all of us should be proud for doing that alone. So that being said, you know, I was asked to put together kind of a financial look at where we are and where we're going. And that's kind of what I was trying to do. We took a good look back. We've got the information looking back, but when you forecast forward, the further out you get, of course, it gets a little fuzzier. So through conversation with our finance director and working together and putting that forecast together, we really felt, you know, 4 to 5 years is a safe number to provide you. So I think as we go through, you'll see that as we go through the presentation. So if you want to go to the first slide, this is kind of our history of where we are. You could see the easiest way to talk about our budget overall as the town or as a community is to really break it into a number of 4 buckets. So we have our town bucket, which is our general operations, Board of Education, debt, and then capital. To kind of look at that from a more visual standpoint, if you go on to the next slide, you can see historically what's, of course, been happening. I think as we can all see from 2018 forward, we've been seeing increases, and those increases are actually increasing increases over time. So, you know, it's something to be aware of. I think if you look historically back a little bit, we had a couple dips in our budgets, but I think when you look at what occurred after those dips, you'll see spikes that actually occur as a result. So the more we push down, we actually see spikes on the following years after that. So the next slide, if you want to move forward, this is based on that past data. This is our projection moving forward in the actual numbers of what we're thinking we're going to start seeing in fiscal year 24, 25, 26, and 27. For me, I'm a visual person, so rather than just looking at the numbers and trying to figure out what we're talking about, it's a little bit easier for me to look at the following slide, which is actually the visual of how that increase is occurring. And you can see how those increases actually fit in, kind of similar with where we've been in our past, but actually I think, you know, it's an increasing rate as we move forward, that our budget's starting to go up. If you want to go to the next slide, really is addressing capital. I'm not looking at the overall picture, but just capital. The gray columns are really our capital requests. So these are our hard infrastructure. These are some of our most valuable assets within our community, including our roads, our school buildings, our town buildings, maybe some of our larger rolling stock, major projects that need to occur. And you can see that over time what's happened is capital has been underfunded. And I think what's happening now is we're starting to see that that's catching up, and we're seeing our capital requests increase, which you could see in the chart going from 22 all the way up to 2027 here. You can see that request is increased, and the blue column is basically what we are funding now. So it's a little less than a third of what the request is what's actually getting funded on an annual basis. So I think while we're doing a pretty good job, we've got a long ways to go. If you want to move on to our next slide, this is addressing our debt and our debt bucket, I guess is the way to say it. So if you look at where we are with debt, we have an authorized amount of $249,761,724 of authorized debt. Now there's a difference between authorized and issued, and essentially what happens is when the town comes together and votes at a referendum and decides that they're going to authorize debt, or authorize a project, whether that's buying a fire truck or building a school or building a town building or doing roads, the town comes together and authorizes that. Typically, those projects are of $1 million or more when they get out to a referendum. So essentially, when the town authorizes that, that authorization is there, but the money doesn't get spent right away. So that's why we have this authorized but unissued debt column. What we typically do is we'll front the money in cash from our general fund. The town has a general fund that we will front that money to the project. So right now we front money to the Pleasant Valley School project. We're fronting money to a number of the road projects. And then as our cash needs arise, we will then go out to the market, typically once a year. And we will issue our debt, whether that is in a long-term scenario or a short-term scenario. So if you go and you look on the authorized but unissued, those are the amounts that we haven't issued yet, or we're kind of waiting on projects to close out. Because the one thing we don't want to do is overissue the amount of debt that we've been authorized, because we can receive penalties for that. So we are kind of waiting to see some of these projects close out, and then we can knock those off. But this is the authorized unissued debt, which comes out to $76,019,007. The one point I will just point out to everybody that that $76 million is something that you're not paying for yet in your taxes. So the amount that's issued, you are paying for in your taxes. The amount that's unissued, you're not paying for yet. If you want to go to the next slide, this is kind of the other side of our budget, and when we leave those 4 buckets behind, we move on to our revenue side, and that's the other most important, the other important side of our budget. One of the largest revenue generators for our community is revenue growth, also known as grand list growth in our community. And you could kind of see the history on this chart here of where our grand list growth has been going from 2018 forward. We had some really great years, and we've also had some not so great years, or one not so great year, and we've actually seen a little decline in the last year. So that's something we're paying very close attention to. Just in terms of numbers wise, this last year we had 2.91% grand list growth, which equates to about $3,262,699. So what does that all mean for us and the general population? That's when we get to our mill rate. We talk a lot about our mill rate, and that's how we raise taxes, essentially, and how we generate the revenue for our community to operate. If you take a look at this chart, it shows you basically the adopted mill rate, and then what that mill rate would look like if we didn't have that grand list growth. So I think if you look at the two columns, you can see very easily without grand list growth, we would be looking at a mill rate of 39.67 mills right now. But I think if you look at with the grand list growth, we're down at 38.77. Also, just at the bottom of this whole chart, just for everybody's edification and to try to help everybody understand what that actually comes out to and what that means, we've got some calculations. So if you have a home on the very left side, your annual taxes or your annual value, assessed value of your home is around $200,000. Your annual taxes are going to be somewhere between $5,428 in 2023 to $5,554, essentially. If you want to move on to the next slide. Again, this is our projection and this is our forecast of kind of where we're going. And it's a little bit harder to project mill rates and what we would actually need, because there's a number of variables that do come into play. We also are not taking into account what could happen if the state were to pull some of our funding. We do get a significant amount of funding for paying for our education cost sharing grant. We get town aid road grants. We get local capital improvement grants from the state. Those are all significant funding sources that if all of a sudden the state were to start to reduce those, would cause some pretty drastic changes to what our mill rate would have to be. So this chart, looking at a projection of where we're going based off of some of the earlier slides, we're looking at a mill rate somewhere between 44.43 and 46.58, based upon how much grantless growth we are able to accomplish in those outer years. The other thing that I often hear about when we talk about our budget is tax abatements. And I think even just last night, we talked about and approved a tax abatement for a new business on spec for our community. And I think we hear a lot of complaints sometimes about tax abatements. That being said, it's a good tool that we have in our toolbox in an effort to try to grow our grand list, because we really are stuck with two scenarios to change the financial picture of our community. One is to raise taxes, or two is to grow our way out of the finances, the financial situation that we owe on. So in the instance of last night, essentially we were making about $10,000 in taxes on the property as it sits today. Because the tax abatement was put in place and the business will go in and hopefully build, we're talking about somewhere around, after assessments and everything else, we're talking about $53,000 in new tax generation. And then we'll probably give them, over the period of time of taxes, we're going to give them about half off over the full 7-year period. So, you know, without doing that tax abatement, that business won't be opening in our community, to be very honest. All the other communities around us offer tax abatements, and very readily would probably snatch up any of the individuals interested in working in South Windsor. So this is just a list of our current abatements and the years that they're going to expire as they move forward. And of course, when one of these expires, we do see that growth then come onto our grand list, which is always a good thing and very helpful. And it's especially helpful if we've got them layered in year over year over the multiple years. If you want to go to the next slide, these are our past abatements and their expirations by the year, and then also you have the assessed exemption to take a look at. So I think overall, I would hope that everybody would take away a couple things. First of all, we have some headwinds that I think we're facing. Just as the superintendent said, you know, we have challenges and we have a problem, but it's not a bad problem. It's actually a good problem. And the headwinds that we're facing financially are not all bad. I think we are a fiscally healthy community. We're in a very good situation financial-wise. But the headwinds that we are facing are no different than many of our other communities, but there's something that I think we need to address. We do have some tools at our disposal, but those tools really only work well if we all work well together to make them work. So I think the real question becomes, what's the right balance for growth versus tax increases? What's the right way to move our community forward to deal with those headwinds in a responsible and effective manner? And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maniscalco. At this time, I'd like to offer the opportunity for the Board of Education Chairperson, Craig Zimmerman, to say a few words.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the mayor and the town council for calling this meeting. I also want to welcome our friends and neighbors from both the planning and zoning and economic development groups. While each of us have our own area of expertise and responsibilities, which sometimes may not fully align, anytime we can share information and discuss the future of our town is time well spent. Special thanks to the superintendent and the town manager for their very informative presentations. While I know there's going to be a lot of discussion tonight about possible future plans and projects, I'm most concerned and interested in how we're going to plan for and pay for our current well-known situation, as you heard, being one of the fastest growing school districts and communities in the state. As the Board of Ed and the Town Council know, the board budget, or our spending, has been balanced, lowered, or suppressed over the last few years by using available reserves. Reserves, or money saved from a combination of good fiscal management over time and spending reductions due to COVID. To be very clear, last year our budget relied on approximately $1.9 million in reserves. If we don't want to see an unexpected large spike in taxes, we need to avoid suppressing the true cost of funding the school district. Since one of the goals for this meeting is the honest exchange of information, let me be as clear as possible. Record-setting increases in students, learning losses due to COVID, higher prices for necessary supplies and utilities, and increasing fiscal competition for the high-quality staff we both need and want in our school system leads to just one fiscal reality. It'll be a number of years before you'll ever see a normal 0 to 3% annual budget increase request from the Board of Ed. While Dr. Carter, Ms. Jamerka, and the Board of Ed will continue to be good fiscal stewards, this reality must be understood and included as part of any honest planning process. And I just want to thank the mayor for the opportunity to make a few comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Now that we've heard the details presented to us, I'd like to open the floor for any suggestions, ideas, comments, and ask questions that could help us move forward collectively and collaboratively. So if there's anyone that would like to speak, just raise your hand. I'll acknowledge you. Art Aducci from the Board of Ed, please.
Thank you very much. So I actually have a couple quick questions and then more of a conversation starter, I suppose. On the capital projects request versus projected budget, I was not smart enough to bring my capital projects budget, but I'd have to imagine these requests substantially are more of the pie in the sky requests, not high priority numbers.
So every year what happens is staff come in with a number of requests and they sit down and they prioritize them prior to even getting to the capital committee. Because we understand that there is really only a limited amount of funding available for paying for that. So typically, based upon last year's funding, and then we do have some requirements in ordinances to increase that amount of funding annually. We try to come in with a budget of around what we expect that to be. But there are other needs that basically don't get to the capital committee even, because they don't prioritize out.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I know just for a fact, capital projects is underfunded, has been for a long time. There's a lot of work that has to get done in this town. And a graph like this would be very helpful if we had it categorized out by high priority, low priority. Like I'm pretty sure this number probably includes the swimming facility, which takes up a chunk of it, but it doesn't undo the damage that we do need a lot of work to be done with capital projects, and that has to be up in the high priority list. And more also as an aside, I think a lot of the numbers-oriented people would be very interested in seeing a lot of the data behind these charts and graphs and forecasts, so we can kind of connect dots and understand. I love charts, but I like tables way more.
And I will say this: my presentation will be on our town website by tomorrow morning. So
great, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And the last one I just want to say a little bit is about this net spending per pupil. This is a number that's been bounced around for a very long time, and it is talked about. There's a point when we're a little too high on net spending per pupil, perhaps, or middle of the road, but right now we're dead bottom. We should at no point ever budget based on our net spending per pupil. Our goal is never to be number one. If you're number one in net spending per pupil, you are wasting money somewhere, somehow. I just have to assume that's occurring. But it's an amber flag when you're dead last, again and again and again. And we're going to be dead last again and again and again as our student growths continue. That's just how statistics and percentages work. But that amber flag combined with all the other amber flags of growing population, new buildings being brought in, areas bringing in a higher student population than anticipated, that screams to us we must be spending more per pupil or more in general to make sure not that we're keeping up with the Joneses, but that we're keeping up with our own very high academic standard here in South Windsor. If we were to work hard to maintain the status quo in our budget, there is going to be long-term consequences to the education of our kids. And let's be very honest with ourselves that South Windsor's education system is probably the #1 reason why anybody moves to South Windsor and why our school systems are facing the burden they're facing right now. So we have to maintain that balance and that equity towards our students. But don't budget for net students, but keep an eye on it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Waterhouse, please, Board of Ed.
Yes, thank you. I think I can project loud enough. I was just wondering, how do we compare to other towns when you're looking at our budget expenditures? Are we similar to towns that are our size and population?
So what I would say is that our town actually offers a number of services that a number don't offer. And this is a conversation that we have pretty regularly when we get to budget time with the council. We offer things like leaf pickup. We offer things like garbage pickup. Other communities do not offer those types of services, in all honesty, and those are fairly expensive. I believe garbage, I think it's got to be around $5 million. Leaf pickups, at least $1 million every year. So those numbers drastically inflate some of our operating budget, but there's a reason, because there's a service that we offer. We also have a much larger and more robust Parks and Rec department than a number of other communities around us do. So for that reason, we have a slightly larger Park and Rec budget. I think when you look at the breakup between funding at the general government level versus town level, that's actually fairly standard. And it's pretty similar to a number of other communities. We have similarities, but we also have differences. It's not a...
Are you looking at communities like surrounding us, or are you looking communities like we break it up at DERGs for the Board of Ed?
Well, so a lot of times towns piggyback on the DERG idea, but also we do look at our surrounding neighbors as well.
So are we similar to everybody based on services?
Except for Greenwich, yeah.
Thank you.
Lisa McNeely, Board of Ed.
I have a question too about the expenditure page on page 3.
Can you move the microphone closer, please? Thank you. And whose packet are we referring to?
Mr. Maniscalco's
Okay, thank you.
page 3, the expenditure one. It seems like all the percentages for the from fiscal year 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. For the town side, it increases by 2.91%, and goes on each one of those. Is that the baseline you use? And for the Board of Ed, you increased it 3.84%. Is that how you got those numbers?
Yeah, it's about that. It was based off of previous year's requests. So for the town, it's typically, looking at both our labor contracts as well as what our past requests have been. We believe that we could grow about 3% and be safe based upon the previous board requests. That's
those numbers are right along the table too when it comes to debt and the capital.
The debt numbers are based off of the debt that we have currently. So that's probably a pretty strong, for projected expenditures, that's the unissued but authorized debt.
Okay, 'cause I was noticing, debt goes from 12,000 to 19,000, so that's almost like a $7,000. Million, excuse me.
Yeah,
Million,
so
sorry.
so we're actually, it's an interesting thing with debt. We're able to control those numbers a little bit better, because we can oftentimes float short-term notes. We can float our own cash out of our general fund to kind of keep those increases at a reasonable rate that we believe will not have serious negative impacts. It's still going to have a negative impact on taxes, but yet not as bad. So it smooths it out some.
So it takes into effect that the debt that's coming off as opposed to new debt coming on?
Yes, it
So
does.
those numbers take
Yes.
that into effect? Thank you.
Conversation? There you go, Paul Bernstein on Planning and Zoning, correct?
No, I wrote it big.
There you go. From Planning and Zoning, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
So these are more discussion points than questions. Dr. Carter, if we could look at page 4 of your presentation. So what this seems to be saying to me is in 2013, there was a projection as to what the student enrollment would be in 2022. That projection was 40% off, not 4, 40. So I look at that and I ask myself, well, could the projection for 2030, 2031 be 40% off the other way? There's no way to answer that, but I pose it as a discussion point. Because the second point I want to make is, even though I have heard opinions and speculation about what's driving the enrollment, I don't know that I've ever seen or heard anything definitive. And the question or discussion point might be, if those things reverse themselves, would this trend continue? Again, not questions we can answer now, but for instance, I would suggest that a year from now, mortgage rates might be 6-7%. That would put a real damper on the housing market. So that's the kind of thing that could impact this. So I kind of throw it out for thoughts, ideas, whatever.
Feel free, if you'd like to address any of that.
Well, I certainly, your point is well taken in that when we look back in 2013, but remember, those demographers are doing it on trend data. And so the trend, as you can see, has dramatically changed. It's absolutely true that here we are in 2022, how confident can we be about 2031? These are the current projections, and I will say, just so people are aware, the gentleman that was doing the projections 2013 is different than the organization that we've had doing our newer projections. And we also just have very different trend data. Even if we weren't to grow at the rate they're claiming for the future, you can see the dramatic difference in what we have today compared to where we thought we would be. And again, I'm choosing 2013 because it aligns with our planning for the 10-year facility plan, which is why we're using 2013. Our turning point was really in 2016. And actually, it may be helpful to know, just because I'm anticipating questions about the 10-year plan in our schools. Pleasant Valley is really the only school that we designed that had the benefit of the knowledge of this dramatic shift for South Windsor. So our other schools where you heard all the things we're trying to do to make adjustments, Pleasant Valley, which if you've driven by it lately, you know how large it is. And that is a reflection of it being the only school in the 10-year plan that was actually designed when this phenomenon was known. It was not known to us in 2013 when we started the plan. And I think, and the reason why I share the DIRG data is because it shows what an outlier South Windsor is. I've had people want me to be critical of the demographers or suggest that they got it wrong. I really just think when you look at how the rest of the state is behaving and have behaved, just like South Windsor for 10 years, it would be very hard for someone back in 2013 to imagine this incredible growth that isn't being seen in other districts. So you saw the comparisons. Other towns are not growing their school districts at the rate that we are. There's a few in the state, but we're in a very, very small category of folks that have this kind of growth in this short amount of time.
Michael Perret, please, Board of Ed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The only thing I just wanted to clarify to Paul's comment is the enrollment growth projections are really important for facilities planning, but when it comes to projecting operating budget increases, we're looking at that on much more of a year-to-year or few-year basis. So in the event we did have an about face and we started to experience declining enrollment, the board would be, as we have in the past, making decisions on at what point do we need to reduce staff if the student growth is declining to a significant amount. So while the debt that we've incurred for the facilities would still be there based on the current projections, we have a little more flexibility in our operating budget to manage if our projections end up being wrong. So, I don't think that we would see that same trend line in operating budget if enrollment reversed course significantly.
Steve Wagner, Planning and Zoning.
Thank you. So planning and zoning is frequently faced with the question of whether to encourage more housing or not, specifically apartments or even developments, single-family housing. And there's actually two sides to that coin. One is that the new properties will bring in additional taxes, and I think generally advertised to be greater than the incremental cost of any students they might add to the mix. But I guess I'd like to know whether it's time to put the brakes on housing, or, you know, from a school point of view, or are you able to absorb, you know, in the facilities and in your plans, a relatively small number of new students that will come from new projects versus the number that are coming from people like me moving out of our big houses and letting a full family come in or whatever, so.
So I would say that the enrollment increase is being driven not exclusively by new housing. So we've had two things going on. We have new housing, and we saw with South Windsor was what it generated. Then we also have our existing housing stock where families, empty nesters, are moving out, and a family is coming in with 2 or 3 children who are going to require services that are different than, say, an empty nester who's not taking advantage of those services. In terms of our ability to absorb, the timing is actually really good for this meeting and this conversation, because if we had had class sizes of, say, 16, which is below our maximum, new families could move in and you could absorb it. We're at the saturation point where there is no more room in our schools, there's no more room. So as new families come in, we're having to do some of these dramatic things that you saw me identify in this presentation. So we don't have the ability to absorb, so future growth is going to require a response. So again, if our schools were underprescribed, you could have an influx of families and not really feel it because, let's say, class sizes were 16 and then now they're 18, so we don't need to hire another teacher. Right now, as we are at the tipping point, so as new families come in, and if you're at max class size everywhere, then even that one child now tips that and you hire another teacher. And so as you saw, we've been tipping from 2016 to today with 23 FTEs. But we're not at a point where we can absorb. So we have both staffing costs that will be impacted by additional children, and we also have the facilities cost that much of which we've incurred, but there's still more that would need to be incurred to keep up. We are out of classrooms, just to be clear. There are no spaces that we're not utilizing in our buildings. You saw what we needed to do at our schools already, and that list of things that I named were all things that are above and beyond, say, the 10-year facilities plan, or above and beyond what we anticipated. So we've kind of turned ourselves inside out and done everything we can to make it work in our current configuration. But we are at a saturation point. That being said, I would say that based on our projections, and I have to base this on today, to your point, they could come back, I mean, maybe they'll increase from here versus decrease from here. But based on what we know today, we feel we can manage it if we weren't to have a dramatic change from what they're forecasting. But we've managed it by having to put a lot of time, energy, and money into the facilities already. We are at that saturation point, which I think is important because districts like us can be in a situation where they can take in more kids without it adding a lot of expense because they've got the facilities. So most districts like South Windsor were declining and have been declining or flat. So if you have enrollment growth and you have the facilities to withstand that, now it's just a staffing cost. In South Windsor, it's a facilities cost and a staffing cost right now because both are saturated.
Mr. Zimmerman, Board of Ed Chair.
Yeah, I had a couple things, but if I could just ask Dr. Carter, I think most people think in terms of teachers and in classrooms, but could you also talk about common areas, like you have hypothetically the middle school, which is built for so many kids, and you could put all the portables you want, but that doesn't make other areas bigger.
Correct. So at TE, with the current information that we have, we feel we can accommodate the expected growth at TE unless that were to change dramatically. But we did that by we constructed 4 classrooms in 2 large hallways in the school that we didn't want to do that, but that's what we needed to do. And we also, Pleasant Valley is critical, as you've heard me say in many meetings, that it open on time because we have to move the preschool out of TE or it will not fit. we will not make it if the preschool does not move out. So the preschool will move out, and that will open up 5 or 6 classrooms in TE, plus the 4 that we've created, we believe will give us enough classroom space. What we've analyzed and what we're really worried about is how we can keep the number of cafeteria shifts that we need with the number of students that would be in the CAF. So we're doing facility study right now to determine what would the cost be and how feasible is it to find ways to enlarge that space to incorporate more children for CAF. So Mr. Zimmerman is correct that it's not just classrooms that we have to accommodate, it's the common spaces as well, and cafeteria is a perfect example of a space that needs to have a safe amount of space to accommodate the number of students. Otherwise, you're having lunch from 7 a.m. till 3 p.m. And we need to have lunch be somewhere near lunchtime for kids.
Mayor, if I could just ask, I usually try to stay in my lane, but I really appreciate the town manager's presentation. So being not the #1 math guy in the room, but somewhere down the list, I do have a couple of questions.
Mr. Zimmerman, could you just hold off on your question? I'd like Mr. Maniscalco to be able to answer the planning and zoning question. If he had any remarks to Mr. Wagner's question, please.
Well, I think Mr. Wagner's question was directed at the Board of Ed, if I remember correctly.
Or talking about building of I didn't know if you want to address it on the town side of things with building houses.
Well, I mean, from a community perspective and a
Yes.
community development perspective, I think we want to make sure that we are a welcoming and open community to everyone. And I don't think we want to attempt to close that door anytime soon, especially given state moves that have been made to ensure that there's affordable housing and other things within all of our communities. So from that perspective, I would say that. But my understanding was Mr. Wagner was directed it towards the Board of Ed specifically, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's fine.
Mr. Zimmerman?
Yep. So just to the town manager, I'm on the slide that shows projected mill rates like over 3 years, and I'm looking at the $350,000 house, and I just want to get an idea. I think my math is correct, but it looks as though projected taxes would go up over 3 years by about $1,700 if you look at the low in the first year and the high in the last year. And if I did my math, it's a ballpark. It's $570 a year, which is $50 a month. Ballpark, which is $1.70 a day. Ballpark. Is that?
That sounds about right. And remember, of course, there's a number of assumptions in there. So, we're making the assumption that you're going to have a 2% grand list growth. You're making the assumption, or a 4% grand list growth. You're making the assumption that we're going to have, level funded state funding, things of that nature. So.
Okay. Just wanted to see if I understood the math.
Yeah.
And then under the current abatement page, and I'm just using tempo as an example, and I'm completely out of my league here, but do I understand correctly that when tempo, as the example, whenever it comes off the abatement in a couple years, $7 million becomes taxable, if you will?
Correct.
And I think that means they would pay approximately $200,000 more. What I did was extrapolate the
I'd have to
taxes
do
on
the
the
math.
$350,000 home to the 7.2 million. I don't know if it's that simple.
I don't think it's that simple. We would have to sit down with a calculator later, but it would be more than that.
It'd be more than that?
It would be more than that.
Okay, because I think sometimes it's good for us to know just like kind of what's coming, and I appreciate your help on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and some of these, I think, also, when you look at abatements, it's important to note that, for example, Tempo is a great example of this. While we have abated taxes on the apartments, we are collecting taxes on all the cars that are there. So we are collecting more in personal property as a result. So, and those can't be abated.
Councilor Kubowski?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dr. Carter and Chairman Zimmerman, I'm wondering if you could answer a question for me. So I know the Board of Ed works very hard to come in with as low a budget as possible, and having been on the board, I know there are things that are asked for that get cut. What I'm wondering is, if over the last few years, what are some of the items that have not been pushed forward that you would deem to be very important versus the ones that were pushed forward that were essentially necessary? But what are some of the ones that you would have liked to have brought forward that you just couldn't do it because of the budget constraints?
I don't have a list handy in my mind right now, so I'd want to give that some thought. But I think maybe I could address that by just saying to the larger question that you're posing, that the Board of Ed budgets have been really just keeping pace with enrollment growth. It hasn't been primarily moving the district forward and lots of investments that we would want to make. So I think that's kind of at the crux of some of the decision-making and why I brought up operating budgets tonight, because if all we do is keep pace with enrollment, you won't be making improvements. And you can see, there's a challenge just keeping up with the enrollment, right? What I've laid out for you tonight, it shows that even if we all decided we're okay with not moving the district forward and not making improvements, that it will be a challenge just to keep pace with the staffing and that's needed and the facilities work that's needed, especially because we are at that saturation tipping point. You know, every time we have to add a portable, that's a major expense. And what that does is crowd out other things that may be improvements or things that the town or the board needs. And I will also say, and Chairman Zimmerman alluded to it, we've had the good fortune of having reserves, in part because of really good fiscal management, but in part just things out of our control that I wouldn't take credit for, but they still provided us with funds. So we've had very good years in healthcare recently. That generates a surplus in our healthcare reserve that allows us to mitigate our ask. So our appropriation last year that we requested of the town council reflected using $1.9 million worth of reserves. That's not bad in and of itself, but if we don't factor that into the planning for taxes and so on, I mean, my recommendation is to really use the spending plan as your guide for the tax increase versus the reliance on the reserve, because what that does is it masks the true cost. So we've been able to come in with relatively low budgets considering our growth, but it's because we've had great healthcare claims and we're able to rely on that. COVID, it sounds strange, and I did a whole presentation on it, but COVID generated a lot of savings for us. Some of it very unwanted savings, like through the bus driver shortage that continues. So we had those funds, but the appropriation and the spending plan become two different things when you do that, and it can mask the true cost. And what I'm saying is, as we dwindle down these reserves, and I'm trying to do it over time to smooth the spikes that would impact the taxpayer, if we use them too quickly, we will suddenly not have them, and that's what's going to create the spike. And what I am trying to communicate tonight is that perhaps people may not realize where we're going to be once those reserves are no longer available to us, because we're often thinking about the appropriation driving the tax increase and not the true spending plan. I know that didn't totally answer your question. I'm sure board members can come up with their own list of things they wish.
So, Mr. Kubowski, I'll just give you one, because I don't think we want to go through a long list, but you know, Counselor Evans can relate. When she was on the board, you know, I would throw out class size. If we had extra classrooms in our buildings like every other school district, and we had the money available, that would be one way to improve the education that the majority of the kids are getting. But that would cost money, and we don't have room to begin with, so it's not an option that we can even think about. But that would be a big one.
Councilor Leidecker?
Thank you. I kind of just, it's a question, not really, more of a discussion. I want to go back to Mr. Wagner's point of, you know, what realistically do we do? And I'm not sure I've heard any potential solutions. I think putting a practical face on this, my son is now a 6th grader at Timothy Edwards. He tells me he will not get hot lunch because when there is 5 minutes left in the cafeteria, there's still kids in the lunch line. So what's the practical matter? Is he getting lunch or is he late for class? Is he not eating or is he skipping class? That's what's happening practically in Timothy Edwards right now with our 6th graders. Pleasant Valley went from 350 kids when he started kindergarten to, I think I'm putting together 670 book fair flyers for all the kids in Pleasant Valley. Mr. Myers, right before he retired, our music teacher, was in a storeroom closet because he didn't have a classroom anymore. Our STEM teacher is on a cart going to kids because she doesn't have a classroom anymore. So at some point, realistically, what's the solution? I want to be an open community, I really do. Is it housing? Is it more businesses? Is it less percentage abatements? I don't know, but as a mom of kids in our school system right now, the reality of what's happening with these kids, it's not feasible to give them a STEM class on a cart or a choice between, do I get hot lunch or do I go to class? So there's gotta be some sort of solution with regards to how we're managing our budget, how we're increasing our budget, the supplies we're giving kids. I think it's great all the kids have Chromebooks, but right now, my youngest at Pleasant Valley, he doesn't need his Chromebook. You know, he did obviously during COVID, but he doesn't need it right now. He's not even allowed to bring it home right now to do some of his homework. So, you know, where do we actually come up together as a town with a solution for just the day-to-day practical matters of what our kids are experiencing and what our town is experiencing as we're kind of, you know, bursting at the seams here, but also we need to tighten our pockets because some of us are still reeling with job loss from COVID and inflation and just the cost of running our own small businesses or just purchasing our groceries. So I don't know what the solution is, but I hope that if we continue to have these discussions, we can find something because there's concerns. It's a great problem to have, but some days I'd like my kid to have lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Laudecker, who brought up some very good points, and I'm glad you had this straight-up conversation of what a lot of us are thinking, and you voiced your concerns. Thank you, I appreciate that. And I want to add to that, if I may, that one of the concerns or one of the items that I was hearing is that our sewer plant can't handle anymore. We're at saturation, and I'm going to use your word, Kate, saturation in our sewer plant. So, Mr. Maniscalco, if you could address that. I'm just saying, thank you.
Yeah, my understanding is we are not at saturation, although I know that the chair of the WPCA is in the room as well, and I'm sure he could back us up with that, so.
Yeah, the sewer plant itself was designed for the kind of development that could have been foreseen with the land that we have to develop on. We have one point that's kind of a choke point right now, which is the Clark Street pump station, but there are things that we can do there. It's running about 85% of its capacity, which kind of puts you in a situation where you don't feel like you got a lot of reserves. And some of these big rainstorms we had, not this year, but last year, that thing was running 2 of its 3 pumps. You can't run all 3 and still do maintenance, so that's a facility. On the other hand, there are things that we're doing with our capital money. By the way, that is not funded by the taxes. That's funded by the sewer fees, okay? Which will reduce the amount of water leaking into the pipes that feed into the Clark Street station. So that's going to be coming up in the next couple of years. So I think we actually do have some capacity for growth in that area, which includes Evergreen Walk. So we're cautiously optimistic, I think, that we have capacity there. We're not like the schools where one more student or one more toilet is going to put us over.
No saturation at WPCA. Okay, we got that. And if I could, Mr. Maniscalco, the open spaces that we have in our community within our town borders for development, for commercial development and for housing development, do we have an idea on how many or how much or what more housing units can go in or housing developments or spaces or anything like that?
Yeah, so, I mean, part of what I do is I keep tabs on properties that are being offered and both, you know, vacant properties and undeveloped properties. And I'm sure Ms. Leip could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you kind of have one side of our community that has more property that has not been developed, but yet it's currently owned by people that don't want it to be developed. If that were to change, that could change the dynamics of a number of things drastically. But, you know, overall, we've done a very good job at our economic development within the community, and we are very close to built out for a good portion of the community at this point.
Close to a build-out?
We're getting close. We're not there yet, but we're getting close.
Okay. And I just have one more question. These are items that were given to me to ask. So are there plans for a referendum for the middle school or the high school in 2024? Or is the Board of Ed talking about a referendum on a renovation of the high school or the middle school?
No, we believe, based on current information today, TE should be able to accommodate the growth. The high school could only accommodate the growth by taking back Wapping School as an annex. Again, if this information changes, but that currently is not the plan. I can tell you that our problems are across the district, but not enough to warrant, say, another school. So I know some people say, well, gee, do you need a 5th elementary school? Our problem isn't so significant that we need another 30 classroom school. Our problems are, we need to add 2 portables here. We need to add 1 classroom there, based on our current projection. But those things do cost money, and I do think, you know, the question about how do we strike that right balance with growth, I wholeheartedly agree that, you know, we want to be an inclusive and welcoming community, but I think we just have to be clear-eyed about what the potential costs are so that we can plan, so that we have the resources, whether it be school or town amenities, that will support these families that we're trying to welcome and include. And so it's really important, I think, to have knowledge of what is a portable cost, right? We would, at Timothy Edwards, if we were to exceed capacity, it would be fiscally more responsible to add 1 or 2 portables than it would be to, say, open up I'll make it up, a whole grade level at say, the old OH, which is why we are turning it over, because the staffing costs to staff, say, a 5th building, 5th elementary school, I should say, would exceed the cost of the portables. So by the time you pay for the staff, the supervision, the nurses, the special ed, the specials, the teachers, the principals, when you add that all up, it's not as cost effective because of the size of our problem, that it's more cost effective to do these smaller additions to our schools. The one school that I mentioned earlier, it is in the back of my mind that I am very worried about Eli Terry. If there were more families coming into that school, one solution could be to build an addition onto the new OH that would allow us to move out some specialty district-wide programs that happen to be housed at Eli Terry currently. It's very hard to move programs. You can't just move 5th grade somewhere, right? So, but you can move district-wide programs. We don't like to do that, but we have had to do that. The preschool's been moved multiple times to try to make this whole plan work. So I would see small additions or portables are likely the solution rather than an additional school, which would have staffing costs that would exceed, I believe, what we'd be putting in for. But I don't want to minimize the cost of what a portable costs or what a small addition would cost. We're in the process of seeking approvals to add an additional classroom onto PV. That's extremely expensive endeavor just to even add 1 classroom.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. I have one more question, and that is to both Mr. Maniscalco and Dr. Carter. If you both could answer this question about folks, particularly seniors, or folks that do not have children in the school system. I always hear that we don't have children in the schools, we don't benefit from them anymore. So why should we pay the taxes for the schools? So if you could point out both the benefit from the town side and the Board of Ed side, and what funding of the schools or funding of our town and or having the budgets that we have, how it benefits the residents of our community, please.
Well, first of all, I would point out that at the end of the school day, those schools don't go dark. They get used by our Parks and Recreation Department, our Human Services Department, and countless other community organizations throughout the community. Dr. Carter has been very gracious in allowing both the town staff as well as the rest of the community into those schools after school ends and to participate in different activities within those schools. Secondly, I think, you know, if you've had a child go through school, you probably did not pay 100% of what that education costs. And as a result, over time, you've benefited from that. So as your kids are now out of school, you're also helping pay for somebody else's kid go through school because somebody else helped pay for your kid to go through school. So there's a passing on of that's been occurring. So there is a benefit to everybody within the community, whether you have kids in the school or not. There is a benefit.
I would agree, and, you know, anecdotally, I think a way to illustrate that is look at how many seniors whose children were long gone, who played an integral role in promoting the 10-year plan. And, you know, people would often, I'd have other towns come to me and ask about the plan and say, how'd you get this past the seniors? And I said, well, we didn't get it past them. They helped us pass it. And our seniors embraced this plan because of what Mr. Maniscalco just shared. Many of them said, it's our turn to pay into this system because we benefited. Some of them had been here long enough that they benefited from the new schools 50 years ago that their children attended. So we saw the engagement of seniors and empty nesters in our 10-year plan. And I will say, and I'm not a real estate expert, but I will just tell you what people say to me, and that is, there's a reason why when houses go in the market in South Windsor, you better move fast. And it's families coming, wanting to get into the school system, and the quick turnover and the property values and the prices that people are garnering. I've heard from people saying, I'm really excited that my property values have gone up because people see this as a community that is investing in its schools. It is quite something. It is quite something, and everyone here deserves credit as well as all of our residents. Almost no other town had a 10-year plan and executed it on a 10-year timeline and built 4 brand new facilities. That's a major, not just fiscal, you know, investment, but a major message was sent to people beyond South Windsor that this is a community that cares about public education and invests in its community. It's an astounding thing. I've probably had at least 20, maybe more, towns and superintendents and municipalities come talk to me about our plan and want to know about it. So I think it gets lost because we did it and people accept that, but it's something that people should be very proud of here. And I do think it represents the values of our community that we do invest in our schools and people do benefit even when their children are not currently in the system.
Thank you. Councilor Paterno?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, you know, regardless of what our budget might be in the future, and you know costs are going up, to me, this all boils down to this balance of what our budget costs are and what our grant list will be. And so to me, this idea of promoting development in this town is important. And we have some commercial development that we can certainly promote. Evergreen Walk is improving, but we should get that to 100%. We've got to revitalize the Geisler's Plaza, sitting there for 20 years. And I think where the missing piece here is you've got an Economic Development Commission who's meeting regularly, who's meeting with developers, talking with developers, deciding what groups might be good fit for South Windsor, and there's no communication with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I'd like to suggest that perhaps Economic Development and Planning and Zoning could meet 2 or 3 times a year and talk about what the goals are for commercial development in this town. I mean, I think that would be valuable. So they do a lot of work, and then it's not communicated to anybody else other than a letter of recommendation, but that the details aren't heard by planning and zoning members. I think that's an important component that we're missing in this town, in talking to each other as commissions. So I throw that out there, and I hope we can put something together.
Thank you. Councilor Kozakowski?
All right, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I want to kind of pick up off of something that Mr. Maniscalco stated in this presentation. It's very clear in the budget, in the projected budgets, that there's going to be both a revenue problem, and he alluded to two solutions: increase taxes or grow. And I think I want to start with I think that misses two things that would help with the problem. First, we should be pursuing opportunities to cut to save money. There could be, sometimes we might have to take a hard look at services that are marginal, that have costs that provide marginal benefit. And also finding opportunities to improve efficiencies within the town, within the schools, whether it's reallocation of resources or regionalization or what have you. There's those opportunities. And what I really want to talk about is the growth part of it. We rely on really two things for growth, three things. We rely on the volunteerism of our Economic Development Commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, to do what they can within their capacity as volunteers to the town. We rely on our town manager, who can really only very part-time dedicate the hours and hours he puts in serving the town of South Windsor to economic development opportunities, to pursue economic development opportunities. And then the last part, we rely really on private development. Private developers, people who own land, getting together, coming up with projects, and bringing them to town. And that could really work. That's free market. That could really work, really until it doesn't. And I think what we found more recently is that projects that have been coming in aren't really what we want. And I think what makes us show that what's coming isn't what we really want is that the Planning and Zoning Commission has two moratoriums going on, one on residential development and one on warehouse development. And that just shows what's coming in isn't what we want. So I think what we need to do is find opportunities to really dedicate time and resources to pursue development that can benefit South Windsor and grow our grand list in ways that we want. And so that's, there's, that part of it. Another part of the revenue problem that I don't think was discussed much was that seeking grant opportunities. We are right now in a very unprecedented time where there is federal grants and state grants opportunities available, that there's towns throughout Connecticut, throughout the country, that are trying to get applications in to fund their projects, and trying, it's a grab. It's right now there's a grab for grant funding. And I don't know if we're doing the best we can to grab at that, quote unquote free money out there. So, and that can help some of our revenue problem to fund projects that we need moving forward in serving our community. Just yesterday, I was at a training seminar, and I was chatting with a town manager of a town similar to South Windsor, a little bit smaller, just as accessible with highway access, state roads. And he was bragging that since the start of COVID, within their town, they've had 62 ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings through COVID to today. And, I found that very impressive. And I joked that, hey, I'm gonna, I'll steal your economic development director first chance I got. And he very tongue-in-cheek threatened my life because he recognized the importance of somebody in that position that can dedicate their full effort on economic development opportunities, whether it's through grant funding or seeking development that benefited the town and grew the town in a way that was advantageous. So I don't know if there's a question in there. I don't know if there's a discussion point, but that's just something I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Kozkowski. Any other comments? Artiducci, you had your hand up. I wanted to go through everyone first before I double back on folks.
Madam Mayor, I'd like you to learn the standing rule not to call me if my hand's not raised, because I will talk. I've got things, I've got anecdotes, and I've got stories.
No.
Too late. It was actually just a reference, an earlier question on the forecasting accuracy. It's not necessarily relevant at the moment because that was about 45 to 6 years ago. But the reality is that was a really great comment that 10 years ago our forecast was off by 40%. And who's to say what it's going to be in another 10 years? Those in the forecasting industry understand there's nothing more volatile than a 10-year forecast. Actually, I'm going to back that up. There's only one thing more volatile than a 10-year forecast. It's a 10-year forecast based on unprecedented times and information. When we say unprecedented with the growth we're seeing in South Windsor, I know Dr. Carter's talked a lot about Connecticut, but it's nationally unprecedented. In all of my research and all the conversations I've had, there is no community that matches up to the growth we've seen over the last 10 years compared to forecasts and compared to historical data. This is untold stuff. So when we forecast out 10 years from now of unprecedented information, absolutely anything can happen. It could jump up 500%, it could drop 40%. And that's the beauty of forecasting is every single year we're going to get more information, and every single year new data is presented and a new forecast is presented. So yeah, in 2013 we got a number that was 40% off, but then we got new numbers in 2014, 15, and 16. And then right around 2020 we started catching up and realizing that it was an upward trajectory. And if you look at that 10-year forecast, you'll see it is only an upward trajectory until right around year 10 when it flattens out. That's going to change when we get our next forecast, and it's going to change again after that. But the biggest thing is to remember that when you are projecting out 10 years and you're looking at your budget for 10 years, you want the numbers to be wrong in the good direction, but have planned for the numbers in the bad direction. It is much easier to ramp down than it is to ramp up at a last second's notice. And that's what this is going to be all about for us. And as Mr. Prey said quite nicely, the budgets aren't a 10-year plan. They're typically a 1-year reactive plan, but we need to lay that groundwork right now and understand what's coming down the pike, potentially.
Thank you. Councilor Evans?
Thank you. I just wanted to touch back on what, excuse me, Chairman Zimmerman had mentioned before with kind of the wish list, especially when I had been on the Board of Ed. I mean, one was preschool, universal preschool for the town, which looking at our space in our schools really seems a little unrealistic for our town at this time. But that class size really stands out to me. And thinking about how statistically, as an educator, and knowing that the most successful class size for students is what, 16 to 18, typically. Our contractual class size in South Windsor is 25. Is it 26?
At the lower grades, 24, and at the upper grades, 26 in elementary schools.
Okay. So really, what is so amazing is that we have these large classes, but our schools are still drawing families. We have successful teachers, we have successful students, and it really just goes to show how amazing our schools and our teachers are. I know that in my son's grade, they had to add a co-teacher because they don't have the space. There is no space at Pleasant Valley to add another classroom. So rather than adding another classroom, I don't know what the number in that classroom is, but now there are 2 certified teachers teaching that classroom to meet the needs of those students. And that's what we're having to do in South Windsor. And I just really think knowing the statistics of what the quote-unquote successful classroom looks like and what that classroom size is, my pie in the sky wish, of course, would be to lower our class sizes. Of course, we don't have the space for that. But I just really want to thank the schools and the teachers because I'm impressed that we are that successful and driving force. I just also wanted to notice that although our net current expenditures is so low, I think that also, and perhaps you can speak to that as well, Dr. Carter, is kind of on the backs of those teachers because we have put more students in classrooms. Our class size has risen, so that's going to drive your per pupil expenditure and CEP down. So that is kind of a factor that is driving our expenditure down. Some of these other schools that have higher expenditures per student probably have much smaller class sizes. So I think that's a really important factor to keep in mind for our town.
Thank you, Councilor Evans. Mr. Perret?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I just wanted to highlight the two slides Mr. Maniscalco put together on the mill rate, and in particular talking about the mill rate history with and without the real estate growth, and then the projected mill rate history. And I think it speaks to Mr. Wagner's comment about where do we strike that balance. And my only concern is when you're in a rising expense environment, a miss is far more significant for taxpayers than if you're in a declining expense environment. And if we put the brakes on economic development too quickly and we don't get that real estate growth, but we still have that arc of growth in the operating budget, the student population growth, then it will actually end up being more painful for the taxpayer because our expenditures will be going up, but revenue will be starting to taper off. So it's a challenge because I think if we want to taper, we have to kind of respond to the situation on the ground, which is if we decide to pull the brakes on growth, then we're going to end up seeing higher taxes because we don't have the real estate revenue to fund the expenditures that are coming, and we don't have certainty beyond the information that's in front of us that was in Dr. Carter's presentation of when that student population growth is going to slow down. So I think that the growth comment is appropriate because we know right now that expenditure growth is coming. We don't know how long that will be sustained, but I'd be hesitant to stop economic development and end up causing ourselves a harder situation in 5 years.
Thank you. Dr. Anita Alongo, Board of Ed.
So mine is, it's not a question, it's more of a discussion point and an observation. I was listening to everybody around the room and I'm wondering, I heard about, we have a strategic planning committee, I believe, but how are they factoring all these different issues like the school growth and, so where are they with planning and how much does the Board of Education and our needs factor into that planning? Because I have no idea and I'm on the Board of Ed, so it's something I would like to know and I think it should be something that, they take into consideration as well. And, referring to Mr. Kobarsky, it's so hard to think of one, one specific or a couple of specific items that the Board of Education had to give up in the interests of adjusting or balancing our budget. But I can just think of something which was going on a few months ago, which is installing air conditioning in the high school. And there was so much of discussion and so much of budget cutting to make it like the most economical situation, which was probably not the best for the building, but given the limited funds that we had at our disposal. So there's just a myriad issues that we put aside.
Thank you. Mr. Maniscalco.
Yeah, in terms of the strategic planning, the council did put a resolution together and pass it, creating a strategic planning committee. They've been meeting pretty regularly for the last probably 4 or 5 months. They just recently engaged the services of a consultant to come in and help them with that process of actually reaching out to all the different boards and all the community and everybody else. So they just talked with him. They just got his proposal back, so they're going to be reviewing that and making sure that that meets what they're looking for, and then we'll be moving forward with that. Because, we had a conversation, I believe, at the council level where we could all sit down and, as the 9 council members and myself, and come up with some kind of plan. But that's not really the community of South Windsor's strategic plan. That's just the council's strategic plan, and it doesn't take into account all the other people and stakeholders within our community. And that's really what that committee is striving to do, is to account for all 27,000 residents within our community, to make sure that their voices are heard and their opinions are heard, and that it's meeting the need of what the community wants to accomplish.
Chairman Bart Pasconis, Planning and Zoning.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Dr. Carter, on the PowerPoint presentation that you presented, it's showing the projection for increases to 2031 of about 700 students by the numbers I see here. But yet, in your dark blue chart on the bottom,
Could you tell me the page number that you're on?
page 4.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, sorry.
Thank you.
It's showing that the elementary schools are only possibly going to increase projected 7 students. And yet our current enrollments in the left column, almost half of the students are elementary kids. And yet the high school's projected to increase by 444, middle school 246, and the elementary schools 7? Decreasing by 7. Thank you, Steve. Back in 2012, when I first heard about the projections coming out, I didn't feel those were accurate at that time. I lived in a neighborhood where every family around me was an elderly family that was going to be moving on or staying there, possibly, living out the rest of their lives there. But 6 of the 7 families around me all moved on to other housing, wherever it might be, Florida, whatever. And they were all replaced by young families with kids. I didn't think those numbers were good back then, and I don't think these numbers are good right now. I don't think that's realistic. So I just want to throw that out there. I mean, do these numbers make sense to other people here?
So, Mr. Pasco, maybe I could just explain a little bit about the projection. So, the influx of kids hit us at the elementary level first. So you didn't see the impact at TE for a while. You didn't see the impact at the high school. You saw the impact at K-5, and that's why you saw this huge growth in K-5. Families were moving in with younger children. And what this is showing, or what they're predicting, accurate or not, what they're predicting, they're showing you how that wave of students is aging up in the system. So we have a huge influx of kids, and they're saying, okay, at elementary, you're gonna have a large elementary cohort, but that's gonna plateau out, because as you point out, they're saying in 10 years, you'll be stabilized or down 7, which is really flat, right? And they're saying at TE, because you've been experiencing growth at TE, that number's smaller because you've already had the growth at TE. The place that hasn't really been hit yet but will is the high school. So that's why you see the high school having a much larger number, TE having a sort of a medium number, and then elementary plateauing out. And what I think that and the demographers could explain this much better than me, I'm not a demographer, but what they're looking at with the housing stock is we've had this huge turnover, right, of the families you just described. So when an empty nester family moves to Florida, wherever they're going, and they're replaced by young children, we just had a huge influx of that. They're now anticipating that those households are gonna stay, they're gonna raise their kids in our community, their kids are gonna go through the system, and that this will be cyclical. A whole nother group of people in the future will be sitting around a meeting like this, talking about our declining enrollment, and these folks that have their young children in our schools right now will eventually be older and may stay until they turn over. So that's why you see sort of the cyclical move, not just unique to South Windsor, but when you look at school enrollments even statewide or nationally, you'll see the age of the community impacting the wave, the sort of the bubbles and the bursts, if you would, of the enrollment. So that's what they're predicting right now, is that we're gonna plateau at K-5 because we've sort of maximized all those young families that came in with young children, which is typically when more people move, when their children are younger. You find that families are more reluctant to move when their kids are in high school and those kinds of things. And that's why this conversation, tying this to the economics of it is, I'm just gonna use round numbers. When you have a household in South Windsor, and let's just say it pays $8,000 in taxes. When that household is filled with two middle-aged folks, don't have kids in the system, they're not using a lot of town services, they're not calling for police or ambulance or things that may add up on the town side services, they are economically beneficial in terms of those taxes coming to the town because they're not using as many services. When they move and a family comes in with 3 children, they are a high user of our services, and their taxes, their $8,000, does not pay the equivalent of what it costs to educate their 3 children. So that's what we're seeing is this we've had this influx of families that have children that are utilizing services at a high level, which is why I'm commenting on the connection to the budget. But to your point about whether these are you saying that you're fearful that this enrollment is suppressed and that it will be even higher? Is that what your concern is?
What I'm fearful is that if the projections mirror what is happening currently with the enrollment of elementary kids being almost equal to the middle school and the high school, your projections for the elementary school are going to be way off by probably 300 kids. So I'm not sure who you're using to gather these numbers, but if it's the same people that are telling us that there's only going to be 24 or 25 kids in these developments, and we end up with over 100, we're going to be in sad shape when we get to that point.
So for clarity, the developers that are not associated with our demographers came up with that, with the numbers for South Windsor Woods. So that was not the district's demographers. That was a different set of whoever they used for their projections by that development company. So those aren't our demographers.
And they're not the same demographers that posted the numbers in 2013 either.
No.
So you've had, or not you've had, but we've had information from 2 different demographers that have been wrong in the past. Whether it came in through planning and zoning or whether it came in through Board of Ed. I'm uncomfortable with these numbers as they sit. I just couldn't sit here without voicing them. So,
Thank you, Mr. Pasakonis. And that's exactly what this meeting is for, to voice our concerns, ask our questions, get to the tough bottom line. As Councilor Lydecker had pointed out about her son eating a hot meal, that's what this meeting is for, total, open, honest communication. Thank you. Carolyn Carey, Planning and Zoning.
So I just had a couple questions. I agree with Art that, any forecast is based on assumptions. And so I think, and this goes to what you're saying as well, that, the key assumptions to make to these numbers, and I have no doubt that these numbers will get there, but I do think that probably the elementary school numbers are low, because it's making an assumption that these young families that are moving into these raised ranchers are going to stay there. And I don't know that that's true. So one of the things that would be helpful to us as a town would be to take a hard look at the key assumptions used in the forecast, and then also take a look at the key assumptions that were used in the 2013 forecast that went awry, and what assumptions don't correlate to the right answer, right? I do this for a living. You have to look at what am I thinking is going to happen, and then in a case where the time has passed, what was the assumption back then and what wasn't correct? What assumptions were made then that weren't correct, and then let's look at the assumptions being made today and say, are any of them included here? Are there demographics? And I do think one of the things, and it would be interesting to look at other towns and look at our demographics. We have a lot of small homes in South Windsor. We have a lot of raised ranches, split levels that are small, right? And then we have the big things that have been built in the last, say, 15 years. But where are we seeing that growth? Is it in the smaller homes where you're getting those young families, it's their first home? Maybe they're coming out of apartments, they want to stay in South Windsor. Are those going to turn over? Will they move to other houses in South Windsor? But it all comes down to what were the the assumptions made? And are these numbers right, or could they be off by 500 children upward? In which case, all of our planning will be off if we don't look at that. And there are some ways to do that statistically, and I think it would be worth our while.
You know, some of you we've brought in the demographers. I think we presented to planning and zoning a couple years ago. The demographer, the firm is that the demographer is now associated with is SLAM. And I think you would find him very credible and have a lot of really good information, and he could share what are those assumptions and how do they calculate it, and answer that question. Well, why do you think elementary is going to plateau, and what did you base that on? He works very closely with Michelle Lipe and talks with Michelle about what's happening in town. I mean, at a minimum, you would find the presentation very interesting. I see that some who saw that presentation did. It really drills down. It's not, his presentation is actually a little bit less about schools, and it's more about the town of South Windsor and what's happening with housing and what's happening in comparative locations. And so it's very informative. I can't say whether these are accurate, but what I can say is that there is the ability to share with you what were the assumptions, how did they come up with this, and what are they assuming. To your point, there's probably an assumption that once families are settled, they may be staying. And to your point, is there going to be more movement within the community? You're absolutely right that part of the appeal for South Windsor is that we have a reputation of having a great school system, and we're a little bit more accessible than some communities that we get compared to in terms of our school system. So there are some of that smaller housing stock. A family can access housing in South Windsor a little more readily than some of the more affluent towns where their housing is not as accessible. So that is part of the draw, and also the diversity of our housing. So you know, there's been dramatic, and I don't have the stats in this, but Michelle's department may. Just looking at our condominiums and apartments right now, what was it 10 years ago in terms of the age ranges of folks living in those, and what are the number of kids that are being generated by those condos and apartments? Because we did see the early spike and the early change was driven in our schools that have the catchment area that has more condos and apartments. So that probably is a pretty dramatic change. I would imagine if we looked 10 years ago at some of those facilities and looked today, how many kids were there 10, 15 years ago and how many kids today, my guess, and people here know much more about it than I do, is we'd see a pretty dramatic shift.
Thank you. Michael LeBlanc, Planning and Zoning.
Thank you. Yeah, just thinking about this school system situation here, and the old Orchard Hill building, I know it sits empty pretty much for the most part. Could that possibly be used as swing space? Would that help the school system at all? My wife grew up here in the 1970s, and she went to the old Board of Ed school for 6th grade. I think it was on Main Street there, but the town did do these practices in the past, and I can't see why that building wouldn't be used other than a little bit of abatement and probably ADA issues. It could be used for something.
So we did look at that, and we felt that the expenses to operate a whole nother school would actually exceed the expenses of some of our other mitigation strategies. And because we've had to ask Parks and Rec to move out of Wapping, that will be their new home temporarily while they work on a plan. So in some ways, it is being used as exactly as you described as swing space, because the Parks and Rec program will be utilizing it temporarily while they work on their long-term plan. There could be other potential uses that could benefit the district, even in partnership, which we have not discussed, but for example, this is a program I haven't even brought up, but we have an 18 to 22-year-old special education program that is state mandated, and we had been utilizing space at Goodwin University. That space is no longer available to us. They sold the building, and so that might be a location for that program that we could use, because it really is supposed to be in a community building, not a K-12 building by the state's concept and philosophy. I have not mentioned this to Mr. Maniscalco at this point, but yes, we are looking for real estate in lots of places. But to your point, when we looked at whether moving, say, an entire grade level out of TE and putting it there, the operating expenses we felt would exceed the other kinds of mitigation strategies that we are doing, which are not cheap, but less expensive
No,
than
understood.
that.
There's duplicate services and everything, but if you can't go through a lunch line in a determined amount of time, I mean, that's, to me, that's a big issue. That's not right either.
And that's why we're doing the feasibility study on enlarging the cafeteria, to try to move those processes, to set up those processes differently, if we can make that cafeteria bigger.
All right, thank you. Another question I have is regarding economic development. I'm just listening to everything here. And in planning and zoning, we're faced with, a lot of developers come in, you get these in things, if you will. 5 years ago, it was senior housing. 10 years ago, it was retail. Now it seems to be distribution centers, and they go through these wave of types of development. And to be honest with you, we can really pave over the town pretty easily. And it's something I look up in behalf of the town, thinking 20, 30 years out what this place will look like when I'm gone. I looked at it as the most important issue while I'm here. However, I'm not against development, and there are parts of this town, i.e. Sullivan Avenue and Route 5, that really could use some help. And not to mention Evergreen Walk, which to me it seems half empty. I'm not sure if because of the location. I just drove through there and I couldn't believe it. The place seems half empty. And you go to Manchester, a quarter mile away to Trader Joe's, and it's a parking lot from hell because you can't get out of there. But every store is occupied. So there is a difference in how these places are projected to the public. I'm not sure because it's out of sight, out of mind on Buckland Road that it can't be filled. And I'm also not sure why this town doesn't have enough restaurants here. It seems that when I go out, there's 2 or 3 good restaurants in town. We hit Glastonbury a lot, but this town really could use a bit more of that. So those are opportunities that could be addressed in this town.
Thank you. Mr. Kevin Foley, Planning and Zoning?
Yes, this is towards Andy Paterna's comment regarding the moratorium and us working in conjunction with the economic development, which I think we should. So the moratorium on the commercial and warehouse spaces, that was not only, that's for us to re-look at our regulations, but it's also the voice of the public. Every time there's an application, this room is full, okay? So we are also listening to what the public has to say, and they don't like the direction that the town is going. So that was one of the reasons. On the housing, the reason I really wanted the moratorium was because it seems like the developers in this town and the people that bring forth the applications, again, they give us these false narratives, they give us these false, I had a conversation with Fangara when he came here for the first time with Tempo. And I said, how many students will you generate? He goes, no more than 7. How many do we have coming out of Tempo? It's not 7, I know that.
I don't know, I'd have to
It's a
look
lot
that
more. And what I'm getting at is that every application coming at us now, whether it be at Evergreen Walk or Sullivan Avenue, I visited every Geisler Plaza when they brought in that application. And nowhere on any other Geisler Plaza is there apartments attached to it to make them succeed. They succeed on who they are, okay, and how they keep those plazas. This is a choice by the owner of that place that it looks like this. It's not Geisler's fault. It's not our community. We have 27,000 people that are willing to shop there, but there's nothing to shop at, okay? But everything that comes before us lately has housing attached to it, and that is a major impact to you. So, in all fairness, we do need to work together, because every time somebody says, well, if we don't get housing, we're not gonna build it. You know what, then don't build it, okay? I've looked at that eyesore for 25 years. So we do have to work together. If Tempo comes before us, it's not a good idea, okay? Lower the rent on your buildings and you'll see a full Evergreen Walk. But everything cannot come to us with housing attached to it, like a threat. And that's where we do need to get into a room together. When an application comes in, let's all sit down as one. Because when it comes in front of us and we get the false narratives, it impacts the Board of Education.
Thank you. Louise
I also
Neary?
have another
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, in moving forward with the available land in town, a lot of the larger landowners, they're great stewards to the land now, okay? But as they age out and the next generation is right behind them, beware. Because it's just about to start. So, grants, development rights, These are real things that need to be looked at, again, to help the Board of Ed, to help the community. But these are things we need grants, we need funding, we need development rights to be purchased, and that will help with some of the pain because it's just around the corner. There's people that are licking their chops. So the next generation, those stewards, when they pass on, it's a lot easier to grow houses than it is to grow crops. So just beware.
Thank you. Louise Neary, EDC.
Yeah, I just, to allude to Dr. Carter's statements about how the seniors help pass the schools and all that kind of, you know, and they really did. A lot of them were really working hard. Now, a lot of these people, as Bart said, his neighbors, you know, they were aging out and they're moving out. And I know many productive, very productive town people that have had to move elsewhere because we don't have apartments. So, I mean, if we did have nice apartments, they can move into those, and somebody's gonna fill that house, which they would do anyway, even if they moved to another town. So it'd be good to keep those people that have a vested interest in the town, within the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie Dexter? Planning and zoning?
Because I'm looking at the clock, and I'm hoping that we can come away from this meeting with some to-dos. I really like what Commissioner Kozakowski had to say, that we're not just talking grand list and taxes, we're talking continuous improvement of services and staff hours and the amount of work they have to do. We're talking about maybe regionalization. We did some things, can we do more? And what can we do to break up maybe some folks from each group to continue the discussion and get some, you know, get some things going.
I hear you. We're getting there. I'm just giving everyone an opportunity to speak. Councilor Kubasky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I don't have a question. It's just a point of discussion. We're lucky right now to have two folks who work very hard on their budgets. They're coming in with not a wish list. They've gone through, they scrub the budgets before we get them. I've had the opportunity now to sit on the last two budget committees. And I can tell you in those meetings, as Councilor Kozakowski said, one of the things we need to look at is possibly cutting services. We have talked about this, and I think as we move forward, while I appreciate that the budget increases that are in both of these are basically related to the history and best projections, I think we have to be prepared that, as Mr. Pascone said, we could see higher numbers coming in, and these numbers are going to go up. And on the budget committee, we work very, very hard to try and keep the burden off the residents as much as possible. We've talked about leaf pickup, removing leaf pickup. You know, it's something that everybody likes. I know when I lived on Woodland Drive, it was a lifesaver. But these are the things that we have to look at going forward. And we have to be prepared that some of these items that people take for granted now, we will no longer be able to carry. So it's just, we have to be prepared for that as we go forward.
Thank you. I'd like to move on if we could wrap up. It is 9 o'clock. We did start at 7. We've had 2 hours of conversation and discussion. And if it's okay with everyone, if we could wrap this meeting up tonight, if that's okay. So after hearing the depth of the conversation tonight, I would hope that the responsible parties sitting in this room take with them the information that we've learned from each other so we can continue to use it in our decision-making processes. I respectfully ask that we have another meeting within the next few months to enhance the collaboration between all the parties and to discuss the information that we've learned and the impact that it's had on all of our decisions that we made. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the IT department. Thank you, Mr. Roberts, and pass on to the IT department for setting up this room for us this evening. I want to say thank you to everyone for your participation in tonight's meeting, and I hope this meeting has brought clarity and understanding to the opportunities and challenges that we face as a town. More importantly, this meeting has given us an opportunity to create a plan we can all work towards while still obtaining our common goal of having the best community in the state of Connecticut to live, work, play, educate, and prosper. Now, going forward, before we adjourn, there has been a suggestion that smaller groups get together. Maybe maybe over the next month time frame, I'm just coming up with a suggestion that we go back to our boards and commissions and have our meetings and have open discussion with our boards and commissions, and then come back within a 60-day time frame to sit down and talk again and bring forward some ideas, some suggestions, but to continue the open conversation over the next few months, because I have to be quite honest, and I'm going to be honest, and the Mayor Liz has always been honest and says what she wants to say, but I have to say, in the 13 years that I've been sitting on this council, I have asked for this meeting to take place. I am overjoyed and overwhelmed with tears in my eyes tonight that I am sitting here making progress with the volunteers and the boards and commissions of our community that care so much about where we are headed and everything that we're doing. And I would also like to say that every year we have on the council a budget working group where we sit and we go line by item through the government side of the budget, and we look at the Board of Ed side of budget, and we try to come up, it always comes down to budget time. And I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to avoid the times that we have to sit and crunch and come up with numbers and pull our hair out and say, how are we gonna do this? What are we gonna do? Councilor Lopez, Councilor Kobaski, and myself sat through it last year, and we really, and Mr. Maniscalco, and we really try to present a reasonable budget that's going to have the most minimum impact on the taxpayers. And that's the bottom line, is our taxpayers. And our taxpayers are what makes South Windsor the best. It's each one of us sitting in this room. So I know that we can work together. And if it's okay, I'd like to plan with all of you to plan a future meeting for us to get back together, if that's all right. If I can have a consensus, thumbs up from everybody? 2 months, within 60 days?
Yes, Madam Mayor?
Thank you so much.
Madam Mayor?
Yes,
I
Councilor
wonder,
Paterno.
because I hear what Commissioner Dexter is saying, I wonder if it's worth it to take 2 people from each board, 2 people from the council, to meet in between that time to kind of discuss some things and then bring it to the larger group in 60 days. Would that be?
A working group.
Yeah.
A working group, two from each board.
Would that be helpful?
Is that amenable to everyone? 2 from Economic Development, 2 from Planning and Zoning, 2 from Board of Ed, 2 from Council? And if we could have the 2 volunteers, they could contact Kathy. They could contact Kathy, and Kathy can put those 2, 4, 6, 8 folks together and start an email chain on when you would meet and all that. Is that okay? Great, thank you. And Deputy Mayor King?
I'd probably be remiss if I didn't ask the question, or at least the suggestion, and I'm thankful for everything that the councilors had to say tonight, is we can't operate from a standpoint of fear. And that's one of the things for me and my family, whether it be Geisler's Plaza or sidewalks or whatever, looking at West Hartford, Simsbury, Glastonbury, sometimes I feel that we get caught up in what we don't want South Windsor to be. And we lose the fact that, well, maybe that's why some of our young people are leaving. Because we're so scared of, oh my gosh, we have those people moving in or these people moving in, and we forget that it's those people and these people that also make our schools so great. Let's not forget that. And I think that we can't get caught up in, my fellow counselor suggested that when we talk about economic development, that we might have businesses that want to move here, that want to cater to a certain group, but then we have all the yappers talking about, well, not in my town because I've been here over 50 years. Times are changing. So when we have these working groups, might I suggest that we don't operate from a standpoint of fear. No, it might not be you. I mean, I have Sophia's 18, Roman is 12. Their vision is a lot different than what mine is, and I'm only 49. Some of you are a little bit older than that. And sometimes we get caught up in what our vision is. You know, I'm still surprised sometimes when I see tobacco. I'm like, wow, that's tobacco right there. But that's what people want to hold on to. Oh, I still want this to be a tobacco field. And it's like, y'all know smoking is such and such. And that's what our kids are saying. We don't want to do that anymore. And so when we operate, let's operate even from the standing committee and the strategic planning committee. That's what a lot of that conversation is. We have kids that are on there from high school that are saying, nah, we don't want that. And so then we had to go out and get somebody to say, you know what, let's reconsider that. So think not so much about what you might want, but what about your children and your grandchildren might want that's going to keep South Windsor on the trajectory that it is. So don't be afraid.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Second.
Not you, not you. I need a council member to second it. Yeah, second it, Steve. All those in favor, aye. Okay. Thank you. Good night, everyone.